When you work in cybersecurity, paranoia isn't just part of the job, it's a survival instinct. Every breach I've ever investigated started with something small, a detail so insignificant it would escape the untrained eye. A strange IP address on a server, a slightly altered file extension, or an email that just felt off. Spotting anomalies was second nature to me, and it paid the bills very well, in fact. But I never thought I'd have to use those skills at home. It started innocently enough. Vanessa, my wife of 8 years, had always been an open book, or so I thought. We were the couple others envied. She worked as a freelance interior designer, her days filled with swatches and blueprints, while I juggled corporate clients and rogue hackers. She was warm, funny, and brilliant. Her charm could fill a room. But lately, she'd become distracted. It was the small things at first. The way she kept her phone screen angled away when she texted. The increase in her client meetings, especially late at night. The giggle I heard through her office door one evening while she was on a call. It wasn't the laugh itself. It was the way it sounded. Familiar but distant. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard her share with me in months. I chalked it up to my own overthinking. After all, I spent my days scrutinizing data for a living. Maybe I was letting the job bleed into my personal life. Still, a part of me couldn't let it go. The tipping point came on a Wednesday evening. Vanessa had left for one of her client meetings, but she'd forgotten to log out of our shared desktop. As I sat down to check some work emails, an unfamiliar notification popped up, a forwarded message from her email account. The subject line read, "Confirming Thursday, usual place?" The recipient wasn't a client, or even a friend whose name I recognized. It was an anonymous email handle, something generic like freeman87@protonmail.com. The kind of email address someone creates when they don't want to be traced. I froze, my stomach sinking. It could have been a legitimate business matter, sure. But Vanessa's design work didn't exactly scream cloak and dagger secrecy. And why was this forwarded to her? She didn't use Proton Mail. She didn't even know what it was, as far as I knew. I clicked on it. The message itself was brief, almost innocuous. Thursday at 8 p.m. Make sure it's secure this time. No signature. No details. Just enough to send my mind spiraling. Normally, I would have left it alone, trusting Vanessa implicitly. But the phrasing, "make sure it's secure," felt like it was aimed directly at me. That was my world, my language. It was the kind of phrase used by people trying to cover their tracks, a term I'd seen countless times in intercepted communications from hackers and fraudsters. I clicked into her emails, sent, folder. At first, there was nothing unusual. Work emails to her clients about color palettes and furniture orders. But then I spotted something odd. An email thread with attachments that had been deleted but not fully purged. It wasn't addressed to a client. It wasn't even addressed to a person. It had been sent to an encrypted cloud drive link, a digital dead drop. The attachments were titled generically, Project Overview on Expense Report _3, and Proof of Access. None of it made sense in the context of her job. I clicked on one. The file required a password. Of course it did. But it wasn't locked enough to deter someone like me. I opened my laptop, plugged in a decryption tool, and ran it against the file. The process took less than 3 minutes. What opened was bizarre. The project overview was a detailed network diagram of an unfamiliar company's internal systems. It mapped out their firewalls, their secure servers, even the weak points in their architecture. If this was some freelance project, it was unlike anything Vanessa had ever mentioned. But my gut told me it wasn't. It was too precise, too technical, and it felt dangerous. When Vanessa came home that night, she acted normal, cheerful, even. She kissed me on the cheek, told me her meeting had gone well, and asked what I wanted for dinner the next night. I smiled, pretending nothing was wrong. But inside, my thoughts were racing. Who was she meeting? What was she really doing? And what were those files? I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more information. The next day, I called in sick and followed her. At 7:45 p.m., Vanessa left the house, dressed casually but with a little extra effort, makeup, her favorite boots. I tailed her at a safe distance, my heart pounding as she drove across town to an upscale hotel. She parked, walked inside, and disappeared into the lobby. I waited for 15 minutes before following her in. I found her in the lounge, seated at a table with a man I didn't recognize. He was older, sharply dressed, with a leather portfolio resting on the table between them. They didn't touch or exchange any obvious signs of intimacy, but the way they leaned in close, the hushed tone of their conversation, it wasn't business as usual. I slipped into a nearby booth, careful not to draw attention, and listened as best I could. What I heard sent a chill down my spine. When I got home that night, my hands were shaking. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I trusted, was someone else entirely. But was she just working with this man? Or was she orchestrating something bigger? One thing was certain. Vanessa wasn't the woman I thought she was. I wasn't just living with a liar. I was living with someone who was involved in something criminal and possibly catastrophic. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours piecing together everything I knew, everything I'd seen and heard. I pulled her phone data, mirrored her laptop, and scoured her messages. What I found was worse than I ever imagined. Vanessa wasn't just helping someone breach networks. She was helping them breach mine. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was living in someone else's life. Vanessa was downstairs, humming softly as she made breakfast. From the kitchen window, the sunlight cast a warm glow around her, making it almost impossible to believe what I had overheard the night before. But the USB drive in her purse wasn't a dream, and the files I decrypted on her computer weren't figments of my imagination. Something was happening, something dangerous, and she was at the center of it. I played it cool as I grabbed coffee and kissed her on the cheek, but every word she spoke felt rehearsed, every smile a carefully placed mask. I was torn between anger and disbelief, but most of all, I was consumed by the need to know more. If Vanessa was tied up in something illegal, something that involved me, then I had to uncover every thread of the conspiracy before I made my move. In my line of work, I'd learned that the most damaging breaches come not from outside forces, but from those closest to you. It wasn't lost on me that Vanessa, my wife, had managed to infiltrate the one place I'd always considered safe, my home. And she'd done it under my nose. I called into work again that day, feigning a minor illness. Then, as soon as Vanessa left for another one of her so-called client meetings, I got to work. I started with her phone. The clone I'd made of her device the night before revealed surprisingly little at first. No incriminating messages, no suspicious apps. But when I dug deeper, I found what I was looking for. Hidden among her app folders was a messaging app called Shadow Text. It was the kind of app criminals favored, encrypted, untraceable, and programmed to auto-delete messages after they were read. The logs showed she had been communicating frequently with someone listed only as K. Their conversations, though brief, were chilling. K. Everything prepped for tonight? This has to go smoothly. Vanessa, it's all ready. I've tested the drive. The bypass works perfectly. K. And your husband? Vanessa, still oblivious. He's too busy to notice. The last message hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just hiding things from me. She was actively using my blind spots to execute her plans. I needed more information. Her laptop, which she kept locked when not in use, was my next target. I bypassed her password with ease, slipping into her system as though it were one of the corporate networks I regularly secured. Her files were a mess of legitimate work and hidden secrets. There were contracts for interior design projects, spreadsheets of expenses, and folders filled with photos of rooms she had remodeled. But buried in an innocuous folder labeled taxes was a collection of encrypted files with file names like firewall_test and access_logs_4. These weren't files related to her work. They were raw data from breach systems. Some of the names I recognized immediately, clients from my own company, Fortune 500 giants with massive networks I had personally secured. I opened one of the logs. It detailed login attempts, admin credentials, and even session keys that could bypass multi-factor authentication. Vanessa wasn't just breaching systems. She was doing it using techniques I had created, techniques I had designed to be unbreakable. Someone had used me as their blueprint, and that someone had taught Vanessa how to exploit it. I couldn't do this alone. That evening, I reached out to an old friend, Alan, who now ran a private cybersecurity firm. Alan was the type of guy who thrived on uncovering digital secrets. If there was anyone who could help me piece this puzzle together, it was him. When I explained the situation, his reaction was immediate. "This isn't just personal, Adam," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "This is corporate espionage. If those files are what you say they are, this goes way beyond your wife sneaking around." He promised to analyze the data I'd pulled from Vanessa's laptop and phone, looking for connections that might explain who she was working with and why. In the meantime, I decided to follow the one lead I already had, Kay. The key to unraveling Vanessa's secrets lay in the USB drive I had seen exchanged at the hotel. I knew it was only a matter of time before she handed it off to whoever was orchestrating this scheme. The question was when and where. I didn't have to wait long for an answer. Shadow text lit up with another message from Kay the next morning. "Tomorrow, 10 p.m. The warehouse. Bring the package." The warehouse. My stomach turned at the thought of Vanessa sneaking off in the middle of the night to some shadowy rendezvous. I'd seen enough in my career to know these places weren't just dark, they were dangerous. But I couldn't sit back and do nothing. The next night, I followed her. She drove across town, taking a circuitous route as though she were trying to shake a tail. But I was better at this than she was. I parked a block away and watched as she disappeared into a crumbling industrial building. I waited 5 minutes before slipping in after her. The warehouse was dark, save for the faint glow of fluorescent lights in a room toward the back. I crept closer, keeping to the shadows. From my vantage point, I could see Vanessa standing with two men. One of them tall and broad-shouldered, the other wiry and twitchy. She handed them the USB drive, her expression tense. "This better be the real deal," the tall one said, his voice sharp. "It is," Vanessa replied, her voice steady. "The bypass will work. Just make sure I get what I'm owed." "What about your husband?" the wiry one asked. "He's in cybersecurity, isn't he? He's a liability." Vanessa hesitated. "He doesn't know anything. He won't be a problem." The tall man laughed. "He better not be. Because if he is, it's not just you who's going to pay." I slipped out before they saw me, my heart pounding. This wasn't just corporate espionage anymore. It was personal. They were threatening me, using my own wife to dismantle the work I'd spent years building. But now I knew the stakes, and I had no intention of letting them win. Over the next few days, Alan's investigation uncovered the truth. Kay wasn't just a handler. He was part of a larger network targeting cybersecurity firms like mine, using insiders to plant backdoors and siphon data. Vanessa had been recruited months ago, offered a hefty payout in exchange for access to my expertise. But Alan had also discovered something else, a hidden offshore account in Vanessa's name, containing over $250,000. She wasn't just betraying me. She was planning her escape. Now it wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about revenge. I wasn't going to confront Vanessa. Not yet. First, I would dismantle her plans. Then I would dismantle her entire world. "So the system vulnerability you flagged last time, was it fixed?" the man asked. Vanessa nodded, her voice steady. "It was patched, but there's still a backdoor in their admin portal. They don't know it exists yet. And the files? They're clean. No traceable metadata, like you asked. This wasn't about interior design. This was a data breach, a planned and deliberate attack. My wife was discussing hacking into systems, possibly selling information, maybe worse." The man reached into his portfolio and handed her a USB drive. "This is the last batch. Once it's uploaded, we're done." Vanessa slipped it into her purse without hesitation. "You're sure this can't be traced back?" He smirked. "Not unless you tell someone. And you won't. Right?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The tension between them was clear. I sat in my office with Alan on speaker, staring at the numbers on my screen. $250,000 sitting in an account registered under an alias Vanessa had set up. The name was unfamiliar, but the bank wasn't. An offshore institution notorious for laundering money for shady organizations. It was obvious now. Vanessa wasn't just an accessory to this scheme. She was an active participant. And the payout in that account? That was her reward for turning her back on me. Alan's voice broke through my thoughts. "Adam, you've got to move carefully. If you tip her off too early, she could disappear. Or worse, they could come after you." "They already think I'm a liability," I muttered. still hearing the tall man's words from the warehouse. But I'm not going to give her the chance to run. Then you need leverage, Alan said. Evidence that ties her directly to the crimes. Not just her handing over that USB drive. You need to prove she knew exactly what she was doing and that she benefited from it. Over the next few days, I installed additional surveillance tools on our home network and her devices. Keyloggers, packet sniffers, and covert recording software allowed me to see every keystroke, every email, and every whispered phone call. She had no idea she was under constant watch. The messages I intercepted painted a damning picture. Vanessa wasn't just blindly following orders. She was orchestrating parts of the operation herself. She'd been funneling information to Kay about vulnerabilities in my client's systems, information she could only have gotten from me. But something else caught my attention. Her communications with Kay hinted at a bigger goal. The messages referenced something called Project Axis. Whatever it wasn't just about breaching networks. It was massive, coordinated, and, if the tone of their discussions was any indication, highly illegal. Alan dug into it further. It's not just corporate espionage, Adam, he told me during a late-night call. Project Axis involves planting persistent backdoors in critical systems, banking, healthcare, even government infrastructure. They're not just stealing data. They're positioning themselves to control it. The scale of it made my head spin. Vanessa wasn't just helping them target me or my clients. She was part of a conspiracy to compromise entire industries. To expose the full extent of Vanessa's involvement, I needed more than intercepted messages. I needed her to implicate herself beyond a shadow of a doubt. Alan and I came up with a plan. A honeypot operation. I created a fake company, a phantom client, with a realistic-looking network architecture and dummy data. On paper, it appeared to be a high-value target, a mid-sized tech firm with a weak cybersecurity setup. Through Vanessa's laptop, I planted fake, leaked credentials for the network. I knew she couldn't resist passing them on to Kay. It didn't take long. Within 24 hours, the credentials appeared in their encrypted chats. Vanessa forwarded them herself, along with a message, "This should get you what you need. Let me know when you've breached it." It was a trap, of course. The moment they tried to access the network, Alan's team flagged the IP addresses and traced them to a remote server farm. It was a treasure trove of illegal activity. Dozens of other breached networks, stolen credentials, and even active attacks targeting government institutions. The trap worked. But now, I needed Vanessa to make one final mistake. I knew Vanessa was planning another drop. Shadow text revealed the details. She would meet Kay at a private club downtown to deliver the final pieces for Project Axis. The timing couldn't have been better. By then, Alan and I had everything we needed to implicate her. Emails, bank records, even audio recordings from her phone. But I didn't want to just hand everything over to law enforcement. Not yet. Not before I made her feel the weight of what she'd done. I followed her to the club, staying out of sight as she walked inside. She was dressed impeccably, her confidence radiating from every step. She didn't look like someone leading a double life. She looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with years ago. But I knew better now. Vanessa met Kay in a private room. Using a device Alan had rigged, I hacked into the room's security cameras, watching from my car as she handed over another USB drive. Their conversation was as damning as I'd hoped. "It's all here," Vanessa said. "The vulnerabilities, the access points, they're clean. Once you execute, it'll be seamless." "And the payout?" Kay asked, his tone sharp. "Transferred already. Half now, half when it's done." Kay's smirk widened. "You've done good, Vanessa. This will change everything." I recorded every second. When Vanessa came home that night, I was waiting for her. She stepped into the living room, her cheerful facade fading the moment she saw my expression. "Adam? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tight. I held up my phone, playing back the audio from her meeting with Kay. Her face drained of color. "Care to explain what this is?" I asked, my voice cold. She stammered, trying to form an excuse, but I cut her off. "Don't bother lying. I know everything. The breaches, the money, Project Axis, all of it." Vanessa's mask cracked. "Adam, you don't understand." "No," I snapped. "You don't understand. You used me. You stole from me, from my clients. You've been helping criminals jeopardize lives, businesses, entire industries. For what? A payout? Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered. I didn't have a choice. You always had a choice, I said, stepping closer. And you chose to betray me. By the next morning, I had forwarded everything to the FBI. The recordings, the emails, the financial records. Alan's team had already coordinated with law enforcement, ensuring that the server farm linked to Project Axis was raided simultaneously. Vanessa's offshore accounts were frozen, her associates arrested one by one. When the agents came for her, she didn't resist. She just looked at me, her expression a mix of anger and regret. You set me up, she said bitterly as they led her away. No, Vanessa, I replied. You set yourself up. The fallout was enormous. The arrests made headlines, and the exposure of Project Axis sent shockwaves through the cybersecurity world. My company's reputation emerged unscathed, thanks to the proactive steps Alan and I had taken. As for Vanessa, the trial revealed just how deeply she had been involved. She had been working with Kay for over a year, leveraging my expertise and our resources to further their goals. The court showed no mercy. It was months before I could fully process what had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the danger. It left scars. But I learned to trust my instincts again, to rebuild my life on my terms. And as I watched the news coverage of the sentencing, I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. Vanessa had tried to destroy me, but in the end, I was the one who had dismantled her world. Vanessa's arrest should have felt like the end, but it didn't. Watching her get hauled away in handcuffs was satisfying, sure, but there was an emptiness to it. I knew she wasn't the mastermind. She was a cog in a much larger machine, one that had tried to use me, my skills, and my reputation as a stepping stone for something far bigger. She had played me, but she wasn't alone. And if I stopped now, the real architects of this scheme would keep going. They'd find another Vanessa, another husband to exploit, and another set of systems to compromise. That thought burned in my mind. No, this wasn't over. It couldn't be. If Vanessa wanted to play games with my life, I'd make sure the people who put her up to it knew exactly what it felt like when their world was turned upside down. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to tear their entire operation apart from the inside out. The first step was patience. Revenge isn't about anger or impulse. It's about precision. And precision takes time. I spent the next few days playing the role of the devastated, betrayed husband. I showed up at work as if I was barely holding it together, answering co-workers' questions with tight-lipped explanations about family problems. I played the victim for anyone who asked, law enforcement, colleagues, even neighbors. It wasn't hard. Most of it was true. But beneath the surface, I was working tirelessly. I had access to every piece of technology Vanessa had touched, the devices she used, the accounts she managed, and the encrypted communications I'd intercepted. Every night, I stayed up late combing through her digital trail, piecing together her connections and her role in the conspiracy. I started finding patterns. There were financial transactions between offshore accounts, often routed through shell companies in places like Panama and Cyprus. I noticed that payments didn't just go one way. They came back, often in smaller, fragmented amounts. Someone was laundering massive sums of money through these accounts, and Vanessa had been one of their intermediaries. Then I found something unexpected. Buried deep in the metadata of one of the encrypted files was a single, overlooked name: Blackwell Industries. Blackwell Industries wasn't just any company. It was one of the largest cybersecurity firms in the world, and one of my company's biggest competitors. A few years ago, they'd lost a major government contract to us. It had been a public embarrassment for them, costing them millions in revenue and reputational damage. The more I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just about money. Blackwell was orchestrating something much bigger. They weren't just stealing data. They were sabotaging competitors, planting vulnerabilities in rival systems, and, most chillingly, hoarding information that could give them leverage over powerful institutions. Vanessa hadn't been working for a faceless conspiracy. She'd been working for them. It made sense. Blackwell knew my reputation and my access. They knew Vanessa could manipulate me, gain insight into my projects, and exploit my knowledge. And now, I knew who my real enemy was. Revenge against Blackwell wouldn't be easy. They were powerful, wealthy, and protected by layers of corporate lawyers, PR teams, and, ironically, their own cybersecurity defenses. If I was going to bring them down, I needed to hit them where they least expect it. I decided to use their own methods against them. Over the next 2 weeks, I built a ghost. Using burner devices, anonymous networks, and aliases, I created a fake hacker persona, Spectre. Through Spectre, I began infiltrating Blackwell systems, starting small, phishing emails to low-level employees, tracking their credentials, gaining access to internal communications. It was easier than I thought. For a company that prided itself on its security, their blind spots were glaring. The real art, though, was subtlety. I didn't take too much at once, just enough to avoid suspicion. What I found inside their systems was a goldmine. Blackwell had files on dozens of organizations, banks, hospitals, tech firms. They were collecting vulnerabilities, leveraging them for insider trading, and selling access to the highest bidders. It was far worse than I'd imagined. But the real jackpot came when I uncovered a hidden folder labeled Access Attacks. Inside were the names of executives, government officials, and Blackwell insiders who were complicit in the scheme. Vanessa's name was there, too, alongside an internal note, compromised, no longer viable. They'd written her off the moment she was arrested. She wasn't just a pawn to them. She was disposable. It wasn't enough to expose Blackwell. I wanted them to implode. To do that, I needed to turn their own infrastructure against them. Using the data I'd gathered, I crafted a Trojan horse, a piece of malicious code disguised as a routine update for their internal systems. When activated, it would do 2 things. Corrupt their internal files, making years of stolen data unrecoverable. Leak their Access or Contacts folder to law enforcement and media outlets worldwide. I planted the Trojan in a system update email, carefully crafted to mimic one of their own IT notices. Then I waited. The moment the Trojan activated, chaos erupted. Blackwell servers crashed, taking critical operations offline. Their clients, from government agencies to Fortune 500 companies, began demanding answers. News outlets published the Access Contacts file, exposing the names of executives and collaborators tied to the conspiracy. Within days, Blackwell's stock plummeted. Lawsuits poured in. Federal investigations were launched. Executives were arrested, some fleeing the country in desperation. The company's CEO held a press conference, trying to spin the narrative, but it was too late. The damage was done. And the best part? No one knew Spectre was me. Weeks after the dust began to settle, I received an anonymous email. The sender's address was encrypted, but the message was short and chilling. You think this is over? It's not. Attached to the email was a photo of me outside my office, taken the day before. My blood ran cold. Blackwell may have fallen, but someone was still out there. Someone who knew who I was. For the first time in weeks, I felt fear creeping in. But I also felt something else, determination. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. The anonymous email lingered in my mind like a shadow, constantly reminding me that my fight wasn't over. Blackwell Industries might have crumbled, but someone within their network, someone powerful, had survived the collapse. They had resources, knowledge, and now they had me in their sights. But the thing about being hunted? It forces you to think like a predator. I wasn't afraid of them. Not anymore. I dismantled Vanessa's lies, torn apart their criminal enterprise, and exposed their secrets to the world. And if they wanted to play a game of revenge, I had every intention of beating them at it. This wasn't just about finishing what I'd started. This was about ensuring no one could ever come for me, or anyone I cared about again. I didn't reply to the email. Responding would have tipped them off that I was rattled, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I doubled down. I started with the metadata embedded in the photo. Most people wouldn't have thought to check, but I wasn't most people. The image file had traces of GPS coordinates buried within it, coordinates that led to an industrial area on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point. I drove out there at night, parking my car several blocks away to avoid detection. The location was a dilapidated warehouse, its windows boarded up and its exterior worn from years of neglect. To the average passerby, it looked abandoned, but I knew better. Using a thermal imaging device I'd borrowed from Alan, I scanned the building from a distance. Heat signatures flickered inside. Multiple people, all gathered in one central area. They weren't just squatting there. They were working. The question was, on what? I couldn't walk in blind. Whoever these people were, they weren't amateurs. If they'd survived Blackwell's implosion, they were the kind of operatives who thrived in the chaos, the ones who knew how to clean up messes and silence threats. So I gave them a mess to clean. The next day, I created a decoy. I crafted a fake online persona, an independent journalist named Lucas Price, complete with a blog and a history of reporting on cybersecurity scandals. Through this persona, I posted a detailed expose about Blackwell's collapse, claiming to have inside information on the individuals still operating in the shadows. I made sure the post mentioned the warehouse, describing it as the group's last known location. It was a calculated risk, baiting them into thinking I was onto them while keeping my real identity hidden. Within hours, the post went viral in niche cybersecurity circles. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.